The galaxy had long forgotten Earth. For centuries, humans were little more than a whisper on the edges of alien archives, a minor species catalogued and dismissed as fragile, short-lived, and utterly unremarkable. When the Zur Dominion, the oldest and most ruthless of the galactic empires, conquered Sol, they didn't even bother deploying their fleets. A single cruiser hung in Earth's orbit and demanded surrender. Humanity, broken by its own wars and starving in the ashes of climate collapse, bent its knee. That was 200 years ago. Now Earth existed as a hollow world of resource farms, strip mines, and slave camps. Its oceans were poisoned, its skies torn apart by orbiting foundries feeding the war machines of the Dominion. The name human was synonymous with servitude. Weak, disposable, pathetic, but the aliens were wrong. Among the prisoners, bred for labor and cannon fodder, there remained something buried too deep for the Zur to extinguish. Rage, a quiet, enduring hatred that simmered in every beaten man, every starved boy who grew up watching his father collapse beneath an alien lash. Commander Darren Hale had carried that hatred longer than he'd carried hope. He had been born in the slave barracks, beneath the shattered ruins of London, raised among broken men who spoke of freedom as though it were a fairy tale. His father had died with a pickaxe in hand, digging minerals he'd never see the value of. His mother had withered away before her 40th year, bones sharp beneath thin skin, another human, consumed by the machine of empire. By the time Hale reached 30, he had seen too much loss to believe in miracles. But what he found buried in the wreckage of an abandoned military vault beneath old Geneva was no miracle. It was power. The Zur had been arrogant. They dismantled human armies, destroyed governments, but they never dug deep enough into Earth's last military secrets. Hale and the others had unearthed something left behind from humanity's final war, weapons not meant for alien invaders, but for each other. Weapons built in desperation, fueled by the last sparks of human genius before surrender. They weren't starships, not at first glance. They were husks, dark, angular war machines in beneath collapsed cities, but their cores hummed with an energy no alien had seen before. A fusion of quantum manipulation and raw kinetic design, something even humanity had feared to unleash. Hale stared at the first awakened hull, dust falling from its surface as the dormant engines groaned back to life. He felt the weight of history in that moment, the ghost of every fallen human watching him. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the realization that they were no longer helpless. He turned to the men and women who had followed him into that underground crypt, miners, broken soldiers, even children grown too fast under alien rule. Their faces were scarred, hollowy, desperate, yet as the machine lit with a dull red glow, their expressions changed. For the first time, there was something other than despair in their eyes. "We were never weak," Hale said, his voice low but steady, carrying across the chamber. "We were starved, we were chained, but chains can break, and when they do," he gestured to the awakening war machine, its systems screaming back online after centuries. "The galaxy will remember who we are." The rebellion began in whispers. Hale and his followers spread the weapons one by one, pulling them from the earth like forgotten titans. Each awakening shook the ground, each ignition painted the skies with fire. By the time the Zur Patrols noticed strange signals beneath Earth's surface. It was already too late. The first Dominion garrison to fall never had a chance. Hale's people struck at night, descending on the alien fortress with weapons that tore through shielding the Dominion had thought impenetrable. The aliens called it impossible, screamed it across their comms as their warships burned, but it was not impossible. It was inevitable. When the smoke cleared, Hale stood over the ruins of the garrison, a captured alien officer kneeling at his feet. The creature's gray scales glistened with blood, its 4 eyes wide with disbelief. "You," it rasped, voice shaking, "you were supposed to be nothing." Hale leaned close, his voice sharp as steel. "Nothing doesn't bleed you dry. Nothing doesn't burn your fleets. Remember this moment, because it's the moment you learn the truth." He shoved the alien back into the dirt, raising his weapon as the fires of rebellion roared behind him. "Humanity is the first power in this galaxy, and we're done kneeling." The shot echoed like a thunderclap, signal that spread far beyond the broken world of Earth. Across the stars, alien empires listened to the screams of the Dominion, and for the first time in millennia they felt fear. The firestorm began on Earth, but it did not end there. Word of the rebellion spread faster than the Dominion's war machines could suppress it. Slave camps whispered the news in the dark. They've risen in the ruins of London. The Zur fortress is ash now. The humans fight again. What had once been hopeless chatter turned into organized resistance, and Hale became more than a man. He became a name, a spark. The Dominion had ruled for 10,000 years. They had crushed hundreds of species beneath their claws, and never once had a rebellion lasted longer than a single season. But humanity was different. The Dominion had mistaken starvation for weakness, silence for obedience, despair for defeat. Now their arrogance cost them blood. The first transport Hale's people seized was a rusted Dominion supply hauler orbiting Earth. They struck it with their newly awakened war machines, not sleek ships but brutal hunks of steel strapped with ancient weapons. The hauler's crew of aliens barely had time to scream before Hale's people breached the hull. The corridors became slaughterhouses. Humans, once slaves, scrubbing floors, now wielded captured rifles and moved like wolves unleashed. Hale led the charge himself, his blade cutting through the officer who tried to rally his men. When the battle ended, the hauler's command deck was painted red, its alien crew lifeless. For the first time in centuries, a human captain sat in a starship's chair. Hale stood over the console, staring at the stars displayed before him. "Earth isn't our prison anymore," he said, voice rough with conviction. "It's our launch point." The hauler was renamed Iron Resolve, and it became the first vessel in humanity's newborn fleet. The Dominion noticed quickly. Their retaliation was brutal, immediate, and merciless. Entire slave camps were purged. Villages that whispered Hale's name were reduced to ash. Orbiting foundries unleashed firestorms on rebellious sectors, but the Dominion's brutality only fed the fire. The more they punished humanity, the more humans realized they had nothing left to lose. A man who has lost his home, his family, his history, such a man does not fear death, and Hale had millions of such men under his banner. The second strike came against the Dominion's orbital foundries above Earth. The Zur believed they installations untouchable, fortresses of black metal guarded by cruisers. Bristling with weaponry, Hale's fleet was a patchwork of stolen haulers, converted mining rigs, and awakened relics, but they had something the Dominion didn't: desperation. The battle was chaos. Hale stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, barking orders over the roar of alarms. Alien plasma fire ripped through one of their converted freighters, tearing it apart. In a silent blossom of fire, human voices screamed over comms as holes cracked open, spilling their crews into the void, but the others pressed on, ramming their crude weapons into the Dominion's defenses. When the first foundry collapsed, its burning wreckage fell into Earth's atmosphere, splitting the skies with fire. Humans across the surface lifted their heads from chains and watched the impossible become real. The galaxy took notice. On the outer rim, in smoky dens where mercenaries gathered, the talk turned to humans. The Drax, warlike mercenaries who had fought in Dominion armies for centuries, laughed when they first heard the news. Slaves with sticks, they sneered, but when Dominion fleets began limping back from sullen pieces, the laughter faded. In the markets of the Vela Consortium, traders whispered nervously. The Dominion was their master, but business favored stability. A rebellion this large meant instability. Instability meant profit for those who dared to play both sides. Even in the halls of the Dominion itself, cracks began to show. Admirals snarled at each other across command tables, demanding answers for why one broken world was draining their fleets. But to the Zur Overlord, it was clear humanity was not a rebellion to be tolerated. They were a disease to be eradicated. He issued the order himself: extinguish them, salt the earth, leave nothing breathing. Hale knew what was coming. Standing on the deck of the Iron Resolve, he watched Sol Star through the viewport. His hands rested on the cold steel railing, his jaw clenched. "They'll bring everything," he muttered. Beside him stood Arlen, one of the few surviving tacticians from Earth's old armies, a man scarred and hardened by years of slavery. "Good," Arlen said with a bitter smile. "That means we can bleed them properly." Hale turned, his eyes sharp. "We're not ready for what they'll send. Our fleet is patchwork. Half our ships are barely holding together. If they bring a single Dominion armada, we're finished." Arlen's grin didn't fade. "Then we don't fight them here." Hale narrowed his eyes. "Where then? The colonies, the camps, the mines. We hit them where it hurts. We take their ships, their fuel, their weapons, make them bleed for every inch they think they own. We don't hold ground, we make the ground burn beneath their feet." Hale was silent for a long moment. He stared at the stars again, at the endless sea of light that had always felt so far beyond humanity's reach. Now it was theirs to take or die trying. "Then we'll burn their galaxy," he said. The raids began with fire and fury. Hale's fleet struck Dominion outposts with surgical precision, stealing supplies, liberating slaves, and adding captured vessels to their growing armada. Each victory fueled the rebellion, and each freed human became another soldier with nothing to lose. One by one, alien overseers fell. Camps that had ground humans into dust for centuries erupted into uprisings. The Dominion sent fleets to crush them, but fleets require order, and Hale's war was chaos. He struck where they were weak, vanished before they could respond, then struck again where they least expected. on the Dominion world of Zarthus, where humans were forced to mine toxic ores. The rebellion unleashed hell. Hale led the charge personally, descending on the Overseer's palace with his war machine. At the front, the alien guards fought fiercely, but they were not prepared for humans, fighting not just for victory, but for vengeance. When the palace fell, Hale stood over the Overseer's corpse, his chest heaving, his armor slick with blood. Around him, freed slaves screamed their defiance into the night sky, voices from years of silence. For the first time, Zarthus minds were not filled with human cries of pain, but with human roars of triumph. The galaxy could no longer ignore them. The Dominion's enemies watched with sharp eyes. The Iraq Confederacy, long cowed by Dominion fleets, began to whisper of alliances. The Vela traders began sending secret shipments of fuel and parts. Even the mercenary Drax, who had once mocked humanity, began to sell their blades to the highest bidder. Sometimes that bidder was Hale, but it was not allies that Hale wanted. It was fear. Fear in the hearts of every alien who had spat on humans, enslaved them, beaten them into dust. He wanted them to know that the era of humiliation was over and fear was spreading. On the Dominion capital world, the Overlord listened to reports with narrowing eyes. Impossible, he snarled, slamming a clawed fist against the table. One world does not defy an empire. But the evidence was undeniable. Fleets destroyed, foundries burning, supply lines shattered. Every attempt to smother the humans only fanned the flames. The Overlord leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. Then they are not a rebellion, they are a plague. And plagues are cured with fire. He issued the command. The Dominions' full armadas would descend upon Su. It would not be a battle, it would be extermination. When Hale heard of the coming storm, he stood in silence for a long time. The weight of it pressed on him. He had expected retaliation, but not annihilation. In the command chamber of the Iron Resolve, his officers argued. Some demanded retreat to the outer rim to scatter and regroup. Others urged a desperate defense of Earth, to fight and die where it had all begun. Hale listened to them, his face unreadable. Then he spoke. "We don't retreat," he said, his voice carrying the weight of every man and woman who had died already. "And we don't defend what we cannot hold. We strike hard before they can gather, before they unleash their full strength." One officer stared at him in shock. "You mean to take the fight to them?" Hale's eyes burned with cold fire. "No, I mean to take their fleets before they take us." The room fell into silence. For the first time in 10,000 years, someone had spoken of assaulting the Dominion, not as fantasy, but as inevitability. Arlen grinned, a savage, broken grin. "Then let's teach them fear." The first great battle of the rebellion did not happen above Earth, but in the void of Dominion-controlled space. Hale led his ragtag fleet into the jaws of a Dominion strike force, knowing it was madness. His ships were old, stolen, half-broken. The Dominion's cruisers gleamed with alien perfection. But what the Dominion did not understand was that Hale's men were not fighting for territory or wealth or conquest. They were fighting because they had been broken for centuries, and now they had the chance to break their masters in return. The battle was slaughter. Human ships rammed Dominion cruisers, detonating stolen fuel reserves in Suicidal firestorms. Boarding parties carved through alien hulls with ruthless efficiency, turning corridors into rivers of blood. Hale himself led a strike into the Dominion flagship, his blade cutting down the alien admiral in front of his crew. When the Dominion fleet finally broke, limping into retreat, the humans did not cheer, they simply breathed, battered and bloodied, and looked to Hale for what came next. Hale stood in the flagship's burning bridge, staring out at the stars beyond. His voice was quiet, but every man and woman heard it over the comms. "This is the moment they learn," he said, "the moment they see us, not as slaves, but as the first power in this galaxy." And across the stars, alien empires tremble. The stars above Sol burned with dread. From every corner of Dominion space, the fleets converged. They came in waves, hundreds of warships, their hulls black as obsidian, bristling with weapons meant to silence civilizations. Where once the Dominion had sent patrols and strike forces, now they sent armadas. This was not a campaign of suppression, it was eradication. Humanity had been labeled a contagion, and contagions were burned from the deck of the Iron Resolve. Commander Darren Hale stared at the flood of incoming reports. The Dominion was moving faster than he'd predicted, deploying entire fleets towards Sol and its surrounding systems, one after another. Planets that housed human slave populations were being purged, cities leveled, populations slaughtered from orbit. It wasn't war, it was genocide. Arlen stood at his side, a grim silhouette against the glow of tactical maps. "They'll be here within weeks. Armadas, not one, not two, all of them." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. "We can't stand against that." Hale's jaw tightened. His people were still scattered across captured ships, half-drained, still learning how to fight like soldiers instead of slaves. Their fleet was a patchwork of stolen haulers and resurrected relics. Against the Dominion's sheer numbers, it wasn't enough, and yet Hale did not break. He could not. "Then we don't let them come to us," Hale said, voice like steel. He turned from the map to his gathered officers, the weight of 1,000 dead behind his words. "We take the war to them." The room fell silent. One of the younger captains, a gaunt man, barely past 20, shook his head in disbelief. "To them, sir, they outnumber us 100 to 1,000. Even if we strike," Hale cut him off, "we don't strike to win, not yet. We strike to bleed them. We strike to show the galaxy that their empire is not untouchable." His gaze swept the room, locking on each officer, each survivor who had already sacrificed everything. "They want extermination, then let them choke on it. We'll burn their worlds until they choke on the smoke." For a moment silence reigned. Then Arlen's lips curved into a savage grin. "I like it." The raids began like thunderclaps, while the Dominion's fleets masked toward Sol. Hale's armada slipped through back channels and shadowed routes, striking at worlds the Dominion had never dreamed of defending. On the gas giant colony of Valeth, human warships emerged from the void like wolves. They struck the orbital platforms before alarms could even sound, storming through docking bays with captured rifles and blades dripping with alien blood. When Dominion reinforcements arrived, they found their foundries in ruins and their overseers hanging from broken steel beams. On Dravos, a Dominion stronghold where entire generations of humans had been worked to death in acid mines, Hale's fleet descended with fire, his forces stormed the overseer's palace, dragging the Zith governor from his gilded throne. Before a crowd of freed slaves, Hale put the creature's head on a pike and lit the palace of flame. Every strike was not just a victory, it was a message. Humanity would not be erased, humanity would not kneel. Humanity would carve its defiance into the stars, and with each victory the rebellion grew, ships defected, alien mercenaries tempted by profit or survival offered their services, but true strength lay not in allies but in the freed. Every human liberated from chains became another soldier, another voice in the rising storm, but the Dominion was not idle. For every outpost Hale destroyed, the Dominion struck back. Harder, they did not fight with precision, they fought with annihilation. Whole planets were scoured, their atmospheres burned, their populations wiped from existence. The first time Hale received word of such a purge, he stood in silence for a long time. The planet was Aerith, human colony whirled deep in Dominion territory. The Dominion had bombarded it until it was nothing but glass and ash. Millions were gone. Arlen found Hale in the war room, fists clenched against the console. "You couldn't have saved them," Arlen said quietly. "I could have tried," Hale muttered, his voice raw, his eyes burned with guilt. "You would have lost everything, and then who would stand, who would fight?" Hale said nothing. The weight of every life lost pressed down on him like a mountain, but he also knew Aaron was right. If he let grief guide him, humanity's fire would die before it had a chance to blaze. The only answer was vengeance. The turning point came in the Odian Belt. The Dominion had stationed a massive fleet there, guarding one of their largest shipyards. Hale's scouts reported it was building a new class of warship, larger and deadlier than anything humanity had yet faced. To strike it was madness. To ignore it was suicide. Hale chose madness. His fleet slipped into the belt, under cover of its dense asteroid fields. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Human ships darted between rocks and ice, firing torpedoes from shadows before vanishing again. Dominion cruisers lumbered after them, their weapons lighting up the darkness, tearing asteroids apart in their desperation. Hale himself led the assault on the shipyard's core. Boarding parties stormed through fire and smoke, cutting down alien defenders with blades and rifles. Blood slicked the corridors, screams echoing through the vast metallic chambers. At the heart of the shipyard, Hale planted the charges himself. As the countdown ticked, he stood amid the carnage, chest heaving, armor scarred. "This is for every chain," he whispered. When the charges blew, the Irradian shipyard erupted into fire, the blast so massive it tore the belt apart. Dominion ships were swallowed in the inferno, their screams silenced by the void. The victory came at a cost. Half of Hale's fleet never returned. Thousands of his people died in the firestorm. But the message was clear. The Dominion was not invincible. Across the galaxy, the impossible had become undeniable. Humanity, once a broken slave race, had shattered one of the Dominion's greatest strongholds. And with that, the galaxy began to shift. The Iraq Confederacy sent envoys, offering to discuss terms of mutual interest. Hale met them in silence, his gaze cold. "We're not your pawns," he told them. "If You want our respect, earn it, bleed for it. The envoys left shaken, but the message spread. Humanity was no longer begging for allies. Humanity was setting terms. The mercenary Drax clans, drawn by Hale's defiance, began offering their war bands. They were brutal, unpredictable, and dangerous, but Hale took them. Better to have wolves at his side than circling his throat. Even among the Dominion subjects, whispers grew. If humanity could defy the masters, why couldn't they? Small revolts flared across the empire, scattered and easily crushed, but enough to force Dominion fleets to spread thinner. The Overlord raged. Reports of failures piled before him, shipyards destroyed, fleets shattered, overseers executed. His claws gouged deep into the command table as he bellowed to his generals. This is not a war, this is humiliation. End it. But no matter how many fleets he hurled, Hale endured. He bled, but he endured. The price, however, was terrible. Every victory left Hale with fewer ships, fewer men. His fleet grew in numbers from freed slaves, but veterans died faster than they could be replaced. He buried men by the hundreds, then by the thousands. He never let his people see him falter. But, alone in the quiet of his quarters, he stared at the faces of the dead. Arland confronted him one night, finding him hunched over the console, staring at casualty reports. "You're carrying them all," Arland said. Hale didn't look up. "They followed me into hell. I sent them there. You led them out of chains." Arland shot back. "They chose this fight. They knew the cost." Hale's eyes lifted, weary but burning. "Then I need to make sure it means something." The Dominion's extermination campaign escalated. No longer content to scour rebellious colonies, they unleashed weapons of mass destruction. Planetary firebombs, plagues, even reality-bending horrors dredged from forbidden vaults. Entire systems died, screaming, but the harder they struck, the more the galaxy turned against them. Hale's rebellion became more than just humanity's war. It became a symbol. Every slave, every beaten race, every forgotten world looked to the humans and saw a mirror of themselves. Rebellion was no longer human. It was universal, but at its heart it was still Hale, still the fury of a man who had nothing left but the will to fight. The climax of Part 3 came at the Battle of Drosker's Maw. The Dominion had massed 3 armadas there, intending to crush Hale once and for all. Hale's fleet was outnumbered 20-1, but Hale knew the terrain. Drosker's Maw was a swirling nebula of storms and iron fields, a place the Dominion considered impassable. Hale turned it into a killing ground. His ships darted through the storms like ghosts, striking then vanishing. Dominion formations broke apart there, massive warships colliding in the chaos. Hale led boarding actions that turned flagships into burning hulks. The battle raged for 3 days, firestorms lighting the void. When it was over, the M was filled with wreckage. Hale's fleet was shattered but alive. The Dominion had lost entire armadas. And across the galaxy, one truth became undeniable. The humans were not a rebellion. They were a revolution. As Hale stood on the bridge of the iron resolve, watching the burning remains drift in the nebula, Arland came to stand beside him. "You've done it," Arland said quietly. Hale shook his head. His eyes were cold, his voice low. "No, not yet. They still breathe. They still hold the galaxy by the throat. Until the Dominion itself is ashes, it isn't done." Arland smiled grimly. "Then we burn them." And so it was decided, the war was no longer about survival, it was conquest. Humanity would not stop until the Dominion was erased, and the galaxy knew its first power. The Dominion had never known fear. For millennia they had ruled with absolute dominance, their fleets unquestioned, their armies unchallenged, worlds bowed at the sight of their banners. Even whispers of rebellion had been silenced with overwhelming force, but now those banners burned. Hale had made sure of it. The aftermath of Droskar's maw shook the galaxy. Word spread like wildfire through trade routes, slave camps, and mercenary dens. 3 Dominion armadas gone, hundreds of ships annihilated. Hale's name became more than a rumor. It became a legend. Among humans he was already myth, but now even alien. Tongues spoke of him with dread. The slave commander, the ghost of Saul, the butcher of Droskar. The Dominion called him a terrorist, a plague, a disease that would be purged. But deep down they had begun to realize the truth. Humanity was not dying. Humanity was ascending. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Hale stood before the tactical map, its holographic glow painting hard shadows. Across his scarred face, stars shimmered across the projection, each one a world under Dominion control. His officers waited in silence, tension sharp in the air. He lifted his hand and drew a line across the stars, straight into the heart of Dominion space. We've bled them, Hale said. His voice was low, but it carried like iron. We've shown them we can fight, but they still believe their core is untouchable, that their throne cannot be shaken. That belief ends now. Gasps rippled through the room. One officer, a veteran of Earth's mines, stepped forward, eyes wide. Sir, the core worlds, that suicide, they're fortified like nothing we've ever seen. Arlen leaned on the table, a dangerous grin tugging at his lips. Good, that means when we burn them, the whole galaxy will see. Hale didn't smile, he never did. His eyes stayed fixed on the map. We fought at the edges, in the shadows, but if we want to break them, we have to break their heart. The first strike came at Voron Prime, jewel of Dominion civilization. Sprawling city world, its towers stretched into the clouds, its surface glittering with wealth stolen from 1,000 enslaved species. The Dominion never expected an attack. Who would dare? But Hale dared. The human fleet dropped from warp above the planet, their ragtag ships blotting out the stars. Alarm screamed across the surface as Dominion defenses scrambled, but humanity's warships dove into the chaos. Like wolves among sheep, they weren't sleek or elegant, they were brutal, angular machines that tore through the Dominion's defenses with sheer ferocity. Hale led the ground assault himself. Armored in scavenged plating, rifle in hand, he stormed the grand plazas of Voron Prime. Dominion citizens screamed as fire tore through their gilded towers. Alien soldiers met them in force, but the humans were relentless. They fought with a fury born not of conquest but of centuries of chains. When the smoke cleared, the grand spire of Voron's governor lay in ruins. Hale stood at its peak, a tattered human flag planted beside him, visible for the galaxy to see. Broadcasts carried his image across the stars, a scarred human commander standing amid the ashes of Dominion pride. His voice cut through every transmission, raw and unyielding. You thought us weak, you thought us broken, but you were wrong. We are the first power in this galaxy. and we will not stop until your empire is ash. The message ignited flames across the galaxy. On a dozen worlds, slaves rose up, emboldened by the sight of dominion might crumbling. Alien mercenaries, once loyal to their paymasters, began to hesitate. Traitors whispered that the Dominion's grip was loosening. Even members of the Dominion subject races began to dream of freedom, but with every victory came a cost. The Dominion struck back with fury. Voron Prime was retaken within days by overwhelming fleets, but the damage was done. The humans had already withdrawn, leaving the city in ruins. The Dominion responded with atrocities. Entire districts of human slaves were rounded up and executed in retribution. Hale received the reports in silence. His officers waited for him to rage, to weep, to show something, but he only clenched his fists and said, "Then we hit harder." The campaign escalated. Hale's fleet struck world after world, each time deeper into Dominion space. The humans moved like a storm, raiding shipyards, burning palaces, assassinating governors. They didn't hold territory, they turned it to rubble. The Dominion's core, once a fortress, was bleeding from 1,000 cuts, but Hale knew it couldn't last forever. His fleet was stretched thin, his people exhausted, supplies were always low. Every battle cost lives he couldn't replace. In the quiet moments, he felt the weight pressing down on him. The faces of the dead haunted his dreams, men and women who had followed him into the fire and never returned. He told himself their sacrifice had meaning, but the guilt never left. Arlan noticed the cracks, though he never said it aloud. Instead, he kept close, his sharp tongue and grim humor holding the edges together. "You're carrying too much," Arlan told him one night as they stood on the observation deck watching the stars drift. "I don't have a choice," Hale replied. "You always have a choice. You could stop. Walk away." Hale's eyes didn't leave the stars. Not until they're finished, not until every one of them knows what it feels like to kneel. The Dominion overlord watched these events with growing fury. Reports piled in, worlds burned, fleets shattered, governors dead. His generals argued over strategy, each blaming the other for failure. Finally, the overlord silenced them with a roar. His massive claws dug into the table, leaving deep scars. "You speak of tactics, you speak of losses, but none of you see the truth. This is not war. This is humiliation, and I will not suffer it." He leaned forward, eyes burning with venom. "Summon the flame of Zur. If the galaxy wants fire, we will give it to them." The chamber fell silent. The flame of Zur was not a fleet. It was annihilation, a weapon so terrible it had not been used in centuries. To unleash it meant scorched worlds, entire systems burned to cinders, but they Overlord did not care. Humanity had to be erased no matter the cost. Hale heard whispers of the flame long before it reached him. His spies brought fragmented reports, Dominion fleets carrying something vast, something ancient, something meant to end him. He gathered his officers in the war room, the air heavy with tension. "They're bringing something," Hale said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were grim. "Something worse than fleets. We don't know what it is, but we know what it means. They're afraid." Arlan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Good, that means we're winning." Another officer, younger and sharper, shook her head. "Or it means we're about to die." Hale's gaze swept the room. Maybe, but if they think they can end us with one strike, they're wrong. We're not a rebellion anymore. We're a war, and wars don't die in a single battle. He paused, letting the silence weigh on them. We hit them first before they can unleash it. We make their weapon their grave. The plan was madness. It required striking deeper into Dominion space than ever before, hitting the very fleets massing to unleash the flame. But Hale had no choice. To wait was to die. The fleet moved like shadows, slipping past patrols, burning everything in their path. Every battle drained them further, but every victory carried them closer to the heart of the Dominion. Finally, they reached the staging ground, a massive fortress world. The Dominion had gathered its greatest fleets, and there, looming in orbit, was the Flame of Zur. It was not a ship, it was a monstrosity, an artificial moon bristling with weapons, its core glowing with unstable energy, a weapon meant not to conquer, but to erase. Hale stared at it through the viewport. His jaw clenched. There it is, he whispered, the end of us or the end of them. The battle of the fortress world was hell itself. Human ships poured into the fight, ramming cruisers, detonating charges, tearing through enemy formations with reckless abandon. Dominion warships fired in endless salvos, ripping human vessels apart. Void lit with fire as ships on both sides burned. Hale led the charge straight toward the flame. His ship shook with every hit, alarms screaming, but he didn't falter. Forward, he roared. If we die, we die in their throats. Boarding parties stormed the flame, fighting through endless corridors of alien steel, blood-coated. The walls, screams echoing in the darkness. Hale himself cut a path through the defenders, his blade and rifle slick with gore. At the heart of the flame he found it, the core pulsing with unstable energy, a weapon capable of erasing entire systems. He planted the charges himself, his hand steady. Despite the chaos, this ends here, he muttered. The detonation shook the heavens. The flame erupted in a firestorm that split the skies, tearing the fortress world apart. Dominion fleets were consumed in the blast, their screams silenced in an instant. The humans barely escaped, their fleet limping, broken, bleeding, but alive and victorious. When word spread that the Flame of Zur had been destroyed, the galaxy trembled. The Dominion's greatest weapon gone, their invincibility shattered, and in its place a new truth rose. Humanity was not only surviving, humanity was winning, but the cost was staggering. Hale's fleet was a fraction of what it had been. Entire crews lost, thousands dead. The survivors were weary, scarred, hollow-eyed. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Hale stood in silence, staring at the wreckage drifting across the void. His hands trembled just slightly. Arlen came to stand beside him. For once his grin was gone. You bought us another day, Arlen said quietly. Hale's eyes stayed fixed on the stars. Another day is all we need. And in that silence, one truth burned brighter than ever. The Dominion was dying, and humanity was taking its place. The Dominion was bleeding, but it was not broken. After Droskar's Maw, the galaxy buzzed with rumors of the impossible. Humanity had destroyed 3 armadas, laid waste to fleets that had once been considered invincible. Slave camps revolted, mercenaries defected, alien governments whispered of opportunities. But while the galaxy trembled, the Dominion seethed. on the Dominion capital world of Xeris, beneath the great obsidian spires of their ruling citadel, the Overlord listened to reports with a cold fury that made even his generals quake. Fleet after fleet humiliated, governors executed in their palaces, shipyards burning. They are vermin, one general hissed, rats scurrying in shadows. Nothing more, then explained the Overlord. Growled, why 3 of our armadas now drift as wreckage in Droskar's maw. Explain why your fleets failed to crush a species we deemed broken. No one answered, none dared. The Overlord's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. They think themselves a power, then let us show them what true power is. And so the order was given. Humanity would be erased, not as a rebellion to be crushed, but as a plague to be exterminated. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Darren Hale studied the incoming intelligence with cold eyes. Dominion fleets were converging again, this time on a scale he hadn't thought possible. Hundreds of ships, entire systems mobilized. But it wasn't just brute force, it was something darker, reports of a weapon, ancient and forbidden, being moved into place. The flame of Xur, the name came to Hale in fragments through terrified whispers from captured Dominion officers, through coded transmissions smuggled out by spies. It was not a weapon of war, but of annihilation, a device that could erase entire worlds. In fire, Hale stood motionless for a long time after hearing the name. His officers watched him in silence, afraid to speak. Finally he turned. Then we can't wait, we strike before they do. Arlen frowned, his scarred face unreadable. Strike? You mean hit their staging grounds? Hale nodded. We've cut at their edges long enough. It's time to drive the blade into their heart. A murmur swept the chamber. To go into the Dominion's core was madness. Those worlds were fortresses bristling with fleets defended by armies bred for war. Humanity had no allies strong enough to stand beside them, no reserves to fall back on. But Hale's voice was iron. If we wait, they'll bring that weapon to us. They'll burn Earth, burn soul, burn every world where we still draw breath. We don't have the luxury of waiting. We have one chance: kill their weapon before it kills us. Arlen's lips curved into a grim smile. Finally, a plan I can drink to. The campaign into Dominion space was a storm of fire. Humanity's ragtag fleet plunged deeper than ever before, past fortified borders and into the glittering heart of Dominion civilization. Each battle was a gamble, every victory costing blood they could not spare. At Vorin Prime, one of the jewels of the Dominion core, Hale's forces struck with fury. The skies above the city world burned as human warships descended, tearing through orbital defenses with reckless abandon. On the ground, Hale led the assault personally. His boots pounded across marble plazas, his rifle spitting fire as Dominion soldiers fell. The governor of Vorin, a bloated creature draped in silks, fled into his palace. Hale cut him down at the foot of his throne, broadcasting the image across the galaxy. For the first time in history, the Dominion's core world saw their masters humbled. Hale planted a human flag in the ruins of the palace, scarlet against black smoke. His words went out on every frequency, his voice raw and unyielding. You thought us weak, you thought us broken, but look at your towers, look at your dead. Humanity is no slave. We are the first power in this galaxy, and we are coming for you. The rage shook the Dominion to its marrow. Slave uprisings exploded across the Empire. Alien mercenaries wavered, suddenly unsure of who would win the war. Even members of the Dominion subject races began to whisper of rebellion, but the Dominion's vengeance was swift. Voron Prime was retaken within days, its ruins drenched in blood. Entire human districts were rounded up and executed. Whole families burned alive in retribution. When Hale received the reports, he locked himself in his quarters. Alone, he stared at the faces of those who had died because of his actions. For a long time, he said nothing. When Arlen finally found him, Hale's eyes were hollow. "I lit a fire," Hale muttered, "and it consumed them." Arlen leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You lit a fire, but you lit it in their heart. Every drop of blood spilled will be paid back tenfold when we burn the rest of them." Hale closed his eyes, his fists tightening. "Then we burn everything." The deeper they went, the worse it became. World after world fell into chaos. The humans struck shipyards, supply hubs, communication centers. They didn't try to hold ground, they reduced it to ash. Every victory sent shock waves through the galaxy. But every battle cost Hale more men, more ships. The fleet grew weary. Supplies ran thin. The dead piled higher. One night, in the silence of the observation deck, Hale and Arlen stood together watching the stars. "They'll break," Arlen said, his grin softer than usual. "They'll burn us all first," Hale replied. Arlen shrugged. "Then let's burn brighter," Hale said nothing, but his jaw tightened and his eyes stayed fixed on the stars. And then they found it, the Dominion's fortress world of Erithos. It was there. Hale spies confirmed that the flame of Zur was being prepared. The weapon hung in orbit above the planet, an artificial moon vast and bristling with weapons, its core glowing with unstable light. Hale stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, staring at it through the viewport. His officers waited tense, knowing what he would say. "There it is," Hale muttered. His voice was low but steady. "The end of us or the end of them. The Battle of Ithos was hell." Human ships charged into the teeth of Dominion defenses, weaving through storms of plasma fire. Ramming maneuvers tore through cruisers. Suicide runs detonated against capital ships, fire lighting the void. Dominion fleets fought with the desperation of cornered beasts, but the humans fought harder. Hale led the boarding action on the flame itself. Corridors became rivers of blood as his men carved through defenders. The weapon's interior was a labyrinth of steel and fire, every inch contested. At last Hale reached the core chamber, glowing with unstable energy, enough to erase entire star systems. He stared at it in silence, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Then he planted the charges. "This ends here," he whispered. Explosion ripped the heavens apart. The flame of Zur disintegrated in a firestorm that consumed the fortress world itself. Dominion fleets shattered, their screams silenced in the void. Humans barely escaped. Their fleet limped, broken, bleeding. Thousands were dead, but they had done the impossible. The Dominion's greatest weapon was gone. Across the galaxy, the shock was immediate. The flame of Zur, a name whispered in fear for centuries, destroyed by a species once considered slaves. The Dominion's aura of invincibility was gone. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Hale watched the wreckage drift, His armor was scorched, his face streaked with blood. His men looked to him with awe, waiting. For words, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. They'll call this a victory. But it's only another day, another day. To fight, Arlen clapped a hand on his shoulder, grinning despite the blood on his face. Another day is all we need, and in that silence Hale knew one truth: the Dominion was dying. Humanity was rising, and there would be no turning back. The Dominion had never looked so vulnerable. For 10,000 years, their banners had flown unchallenged. Their fleets had dictated law. Their governors had ruled without question. Their very name had meant inevitability. But in the wake of, where the flame of Zur had been torn apart in fire, their aura of invincibility lay shattered. Across the galaxy, whispers turned to roars. Slave races rebelled openly. Emboldened by humanity's defiance, the Iraq Confederacy massed fleets along Dominion borders, ready to strike if the Empire weakened further. Mercenary clans, once loyal to Dominion gold, now sold their blades to the highest bidder, and, more often than not, that bidder was Hale. Even in the Dominion's capital, fear stirred. The overlord raged, but his general spoke in hushed tones of defeat. For the first time in history, the Dominion looked fragile, and Hale knew it. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Hale stared at the tactical maps flickering before him. Stars glowed in red and blue. Red for Dominion holdings, blue for rebellion. The map was changing. Slowly but unmistakably, the blue spread. His officers stood around him, weary but attentive. They had bled for months, their fleet battered, their numbers thin, but their eyes carried something new, not just defiance but belief. Hale pointed at the map, his finger pressing against the Dominion's central systems. Their reeling weave cut their fleets, burned their shipyards, destroyed their weapon. The galaxy is watching. If we stop now, the Dominion will recover. They'll rebuild. And when they do, they'll erase us. He turned, his gaze burning. So we don't stop, we don't retreat, we finish this. We strike at their core. Not to wound, to kill. A murmur swept the room. Arlen leaned forward, his grin sharp as broken glass. Finally, you're done surviving. Now you're hunting. Hale didn't smile. Hunting means nothing unless we make the kill. The fleet pushed deeper than ever. Before, their path was fire. Each Dominion stronghold they struck became rubble. Each governor they killed sent shock waves through the Empire. But the humans didn't just destroy, they conquered. At KTH Prime, a Dominion administrative world, Hale did not raise the cities. He seized them. Dominion officials were dragged into the streets and executed. Human banners were raised over government halls. For the first time, a world that had been ruled by the Dominion now bent to humanity. It was more than symbolic. It was practical. KTH's shipyards churned out supplies. Its factories repaired human warships. Its communications array broadcast Hale's message across the stars. For the first time, humanity wasn't just a rebellion, it was a power with territory, with resources, with allies. But with power came responsibility. The people of KTH didn't welcome Hale as liberators. They were Dominion citizens, alien races who had prospered under the Empire's rule. To them, the humans were invaders, monsters who brought fire and ruin. Riots broke out, sabotage crippled factories, alien civilians spat at human soldiers in the streets. Hale dealt with It swiftly, rebels were executed. Publicly, saboteurs were burned alive. For every act of defiance, he answered with overwhelming force. Some of his officers protested, "We're becoming the very monsters we fight," one whispered. Hale silenced him with a cold stare. "We don't have the luxury of kindness. Mercy is for the strong, and until we're the strongest, we cannot afford it." Officer didn't argue again, but alone. Hale felt the weight of it. He remembered his father, beaten to death in a mine for defying an overseer. He remembered thinking the Dominion was cruel beyond imagination. And now he found himself wielding the same cruelty in humanity's name. Was it justice, or was it something darker? Arland noticed the change in him. "You're colder," Arland said one night, joining Hale on the observation deck. "Used to be you fought with fury, now you fight with calculation. You scare them more than you inspire them." Hale didn't look away from the stars. "Fury doesn't win wars. Calculation does." "Maybe, but fury is what makes men follow. You don't lose it." Hale finally turned, his eyes hard. "You think I don't feel it every time I send men to die, every time I burn a city, every time I hear them scream? I feel it, but if I let it rule me, I'll lose, and if I lose, everything we've bled for dies with us." Arland studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fair enough, just don't become the thing we're trying to kill." Hale didn't answer. The galaxy shifted. Again, the Iraq Confederacy, seeing the Dominion falter, launched their own offensives for the first time. In millennia, the Dominion fought on multiple fronts. Hale received envoys from the Arak. They bowed low, offering alliance. But Hale's response was cold. "We are not your pawns. You will not ride our blood to victory. If you want alliance, you fight, bleed with us, or stay out of our way." The Arak left, unsettled, but Hale knew they would return. Humanity's strength was now undeniable, and no one wanted to be left behind when the old empire finally fell. But victory came at a price. Every battle drained humanity further. Ships were lost faster than they could be rebuilt. Veterans died, leaving green recruits in their place. The survivors were weary, scarred, hollowed. Hale buried more men than he could remember. Their faces haunted him, he told himself. Their sacrifices had meaning, but the weight grew heavier each day. One night, after the fall of the fortress Moon KTH, Hale sat alone in his quarters, staring at casualty reports. Thousands dead, entire ships gone. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pressing down like a physical weight. For a moment he felt it, the temptation to stop, to let someone else carry the burden, to rest. But he couldn't. He saw his father's broken body, his mother's hollow eyes. He saw chains, whips, lashings, humiliation. He saw Earth scarred and bleeding, yet unbroken, and he knew he could not stop. Not until it was finished. The turning point came at Rivath, one of the Dominion's central supply hubs. The Dominion had fortified it heavily, expecting Hale to strike. Fleets patrolled its skies, armies manned its walls. Hale struck anyway. The battle was a nightmare. Human ships rammed Dominion cruisers, detonating in firestorms that lit the void. Boarding parties carved through alien decks with rifles and blades. The ground assault was worse. Streets drowned in blood, buildings reduced to rubble, bodies piled high. Hale led from the front as always. His armor was shattered, his rifle empty, his blade dripping with gore, but he never stopped, his men followed him into the jaws of hell, and somehow, impossibly, they won when the smoke cleared. Ryvath's fortresses lay in ruins. Its supply depots were humanities. Its defenders were corpses. The victory gave humanity control of the dominions. Central supply lines. For the first time, the Empire itself felt the noose. Titan, the overlord's rage boiled over. On Xeris, he roared at his generals, tearing one apart with his claws in a frenzy. You told me they were vermin. You told me they were weak. Look at our worlds, look at our fleets. These vermin are devouring us. But no amount of rage could change the truth. Humanity was winning. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, he stood amid his officers. They were weary, scarred, battered, but their eyes held something new, conviction. Arlen grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light. We've done it, we've broken them. Hale shook his head. Not yet. Until the throne itself burns, it isn't over. He turned to the map, his finger pressed against the Dominion capital, Xeris. This is our next step, the heart of the beast. We take it or we die trying. The room fell silent. Every officer knew what it meant, the greatest gamble of all, the battle that would decide everything. But one by one they nodded. Arlen's grin widened. Then let's finish it, and for the first time Hale allowed himself the faintest smile. The Dominion was no longer untouchable. After Erithos and the destruction of the Flame of Zur, the Empire's centuries-old mask of invincibility cracked. Across the galaxy, eyes turned toward humanity, not with pity, as had been the case for 200 years, but with wary respect, with fear. For the first time in living memory, the Dominion was bleeding, and for the first time humanity was more than a rebellion. The galaxy shifted like a great beast stirring in its sleep. Slave races erupted into revolt. Worlds that had quietly simmered under dominion. Chains now burned openly. The Iraq Confederacy, an ancient rival that had long cowed at the Empire's might, gathered its fleets at the border. The mercenary clans, once loyal to Dominion coin, began to sell their steel to whoever looked like they might win. But at the center of the storm stood Darren Hale and his fleet, scarred and weary, yet burning with relentless defiance. From the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Hale studied the map of stars projected before him. Blue markers flickered where rebellion had spread, red where Dominion power still held. The red outweighed the blue by 1,000-fold, but the map was changing piece by piece, world by world. They're faltering, Arlen said, his scarred hands gripping the table. His grin was sharp, but his eyes glinted with something else. Hunger, the old beast, is bleeding. Time to drive the blade deeper. Hale didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on the map. Not deep enough. They still believe the core is untouchable until we shatter that belief. The galaxy will think this is just another rebellion. Arlen raised a brow. And how do you suggest we do that? Hale's finger traced across the map, past the outer systems and deep into Dominion space. He stopped at a cluster of glowing stars. We go here, the core. The room fell silent. A young officer whispered what all of them were thinking. That's suicide. Hale finally looked up. His eyes were cold, steady. So was everything we've done, and yet here we stand. The first step was KTH Prime, a jewel of the Dominion's administration. KTH was not just a fortress, it was a symbol. Its shipyards supplied fleets, its factories armed. Legions, its governors embodied dominion. Authority, the dominion had fortified it, heavily expecting hail might strike. They weren't wrong, the battle was. Savage human ships patched together, and barely holding, slammed into dominion defenses like rabid beasts. The void burned with fire as wreckage drifted in endless spirals, boarding. Parties stormed cruisers, fighting deck by deck, corridor by corridor, blood pulled in the metal halls. On the surface, Hale himself led the assault. His boots pounded over marble plazas, once reserved for Dominion officials. His rifle spitting fire, alien soldiers fought with desperation. But the humans were worse. They fought with fury, with rage carved into their bones by centuries of chains. When the palace fell, Hale dragged the governor from his throne before a crowd of humans who had once been slaves in KTH's factories. The alien begged, promised mercy, offered gold. Hale shot him in the head, his voice carrying over the silence that followed. No more chains. But conquering was easier than ruling. KTH's factories and shipyards were useful, but its people were not human. Dominion citizens, alien races that had prospered under the Empire, saw the humans not as liberators, but as invaders. Riots broke out within days. Civilians sabotaged equipment, ambushed patrols, poisoned rations. The shipyards that Hale hoped to use were crippled by endless strikes. Hale dealt with it the only way he knew, ruthlessly. Saboteurs were executed publicly, their bodies displayed on factory gates. Rioters were rounded up and burned alive. In the plazas where the governor had once held ceremonies, entire districts were locked down, food withheld until the civilians bent their knees. Some of his officers protested. "This isn't liberation," one said, his voice trembling. "This is tyranny, becoming the very thing we fight." Hale's gaze cut through him like a blade. "We don't have the luxury of mercy. Mercy is for the strong. Until we are stronger than the Dominion, we will use fear. Fear keeps us alive." The officer said no more, but the doubt lingered. Alone, Hale felt the weight pressing down on him. He remembered the mines, his father dying under a Dominion lash. He remembered thinking there could be nothing crueler than the Empire, and now, in the dark corners of his mind, he wondered if he was proving himself wrong. But every time the doubt threatened to consume him, he saw Earth's ruins, saw the faces of his dead, heard the chains clinking in the dark, and the doubt burned away, leaving only resolve. If cruelty was the price of survival, then he would pay it. Arlen saw the change in him. "You're colder," Arlen said one night, joining Hale at the observation deck. The stars burned silent outside the viewport. "Colder than I've ever seen you. You scare your men more than you inspire them these days." Hale didn't look away. Fury doesn't win wars, calculation does. Arlen smirked faintly. "Maybe, but fury is what made them follow you in the first place." Hale finally turned, his face a mask of iron. "Fury got us here. Calculation will take us the rest of the way." For a moment Arlen studied him. Then he nodded slowly. "Fair enough, just don't lose what makes you human in the process." Hale said nothing, but the words dug deeper than he wanted to admit. Galaxy shifted again. The Eric Confederacy launched raids on Dominion borders, emboldened by Hale's victories. For the first time in millennia, the Empire fought on two fronts: envoys Arrived offering alliance, Hale met them in the halls of Kurth's palace, now stripped of its dominion banners and draped in human colors. The Iraq bowed low. Together we can finish the dominion. Let us fight as allies. Hale's reply was ice. We are not pawns for your ambitions. If you want our respect, earn it, bleed for it. Otherwise, stay out of our way. The envoys left unsettled, but Hale knew they would return. The galaxy could no longer ignore humanity. The campaign pressed on. At Rivoth, one of the Dominion's greatest supply hubs, Hale struck again. The battle was carnage. Streets drowned in blood, skies torn apart by fire. Humans fought until their rifles clicked empty, then with blades, then with fists. Hale was in the thick of it, his armor shattered, his blade dripping with gore. His men followed him into the jaws of death, and somehow, impossibly, they won. When the smoke cleared, Rivoth's supply lines were humanity's. For the first time, the Dominion's heart felt the choke of hunger, but the victories came at staggering cost. Every battle left Hale with fewer ships, fewer veterans. Entire crews were erased, names added to the endless lists of the dead. One night after Rivoth, Hale sat alone in his quarters, staring at casualty reports. Thousands dead. His reflection in the steel wall looked hollow, older than his years. Arlen found him there. You're carrying them all, Arlen said quietly. They followed me, Hale muttered. I let them into the fire. I sent them to die. They chose it, Arlen replied. Better to die fighting than to die in chains. You gave them that choice. Hale's jaw tightened. Then I need to make sure it means something. Arlen put a hand on his shoulder. It already does. The Dominion's rage boiled over. On Zaris, the Overlord tore through his generals in fury. You told me they were vermin. You told me they were weak. His voice shook the obsidian halls. Look at our fleets. Look at our worlds. These vermin are devouring us, but no ray could change the truth. Humanity was rising. Back on the iron resolve, Hale stood before his officers. They were scarred, hollowed but unbroken. We've bled them, Hale said, his voice steady. We've broken their supply lines. We've shown the galaxy they can fall, but it's not enough. Not until their throne itself burns. He pointed at the map at the heart of the Dominion, Zaris, the capital. This is our next step, the final step. We take it or we die trying. The room fell silent. They all knew what it meant. Arlen broke the silence with a savage grin. Then let's finish it. For the first time in years, Hale allowed himself the faintest smile. The galaxy held its breath. For centuries, Zaris had been the heart of the Dominion, the black jewel of their empire. Its spires rose higher than clouds, obsidian towers etched with the blood of countless conquered species. From its throne, the Overlord had ruled with unquestioned authority. No enemy had ever breached its defenses. Until now, on the iron resolve, Hale stood before the tactical display. The map of the capital system filled the air, defensive fleets circling the planet like a wall of steel, orbital fortresses bristling with weapons, planetary shields glowing faintly around the black spires of the capital. The room was silent. Every officer knew what they were looking at, the impossible. Arlen broke the silence with a low whistle. Hell of a nut to crack. Hale's voice was steady. It has to be cracked. This is it. Their heart, their pride, their throne. If we break it, the Dominion dies. One of the younger officers swallowed hard. And if we don't, Hale didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on the glowing world. Then we die with it. The fleet that gathered around Hale was a shadow of what it had been. Months of war had bled them dry. Ships were patched together with stolen parts, crews thinned by endless losses, and yet for every veteran lost, more joined. Freed slaves defected, mercenaries, alien dissidents who had chosen to throw their lot in with the humans. They came battered, hungry, half-drained, but they came on the eve of battle. Hale addressed them all, his voice carried across every ship, every deck, every soldier waiting in silence. "We were born in chains," he began. "We were beaten, broken, starved. They told us we were nothing, that we would always kneel, that our blood was cheap." He paused, his eyes burning. "Look at us now. Look at what we've done. We've burned their fleets, we've shattered their worlds, and now we stand at the gates of their throne. Tomorrow we finish this. Tomorrow we show them what humanity truly is." The comms erupted in a roar, not neat, not organized, but raw. Rage, hope, defiance, the sound of a species ready to kill or die. The battle began at dawn. The human fleet emerged from warp on the edge of the system, and Xeris lit up with fire. Dominion fleets surged forward, massive cruisers and dreadnoughts filling the void. Orbital fortresses spat plasma, beams of light tearing across the darkness. Hale's ships charged to meet them. It was chaos from the first shot. Human vessels darted between enemy formations, ramming, detonating, boarding. Dominion ships lumbered with precision, unleashing salvos that shattered hulls in seconds. The void became a graveyard of burning wreckage, bodies spilling into the endless dark. On the bridge of the iron resolve, Hale barked orders through the storm. Push the flank, drive them toward the fortresses, bleed them into their own fire. The ship shook violently, alarms screaming. A Dominion beam sliced across their hull, tearing through decks. Men screamed over the comms, cut off by static. Hale didn't flinch. "Keep moving. We're not here to survive. We're here to kill." The first wave lasted hours. By the time the Dominion retreated behind their fortresses, half of Hale's fleet was gone, but the humans pressed on. Hale knew it wasn't enough to win in orbit. Xeris itself had to fall. The spires had to burn. The throne had to crumble. Otherwise, the Dominion would rise again. He assembled the ground forces personally, veterans who had fought beside him since Earth, children grown into soldiers in the fire of rebellion, broken men and women who had nothing left but hatred. They gathered in the drop bays, weapons clutched tight, eyes hard. Hale walked among them silent. He didn't give speeches. Now they didn't need words. They knew what waited on the surface. Death almost certainly, but also something more. The end. The drop pod screamed through the skies of Xeris, fire trailing behind them. Dominion anti-air lit the heavens, ripping pods apart before they touched the ground. Men and women burned alive before they even reached the surface. But some made it through, Hale among them. The capital stretched before him, black towers stabbing at the sky, streets crawling with Dominion soldiers, shields shimmering overhead. The air stank of ash and ozone. The sound of war was everywhere. Forward, Hale roared, charging into the storm. The streets became slaughterhouses. Humans fought through barricades, their rifles spitting death. Dominion soldiers countered with precision, their discipline unmatched. Bodies piled knee-deep in blood. Hale fought like a man possessed, his blade tore through alien flesh, his rifle cracked skulls. He moved forward, no matter the cost, dragging his men with him. For every human that fell, two more surged forward. The Dominion had numbers, the humans had fury. The battle raged for hours, then days. District by district, the humans carved their way into the capital. Every building was a fortress, every street a killing field. The spires of the Dominion, once symbols of absolute power, now burned with fire and blood, but the cost was unbearable. Entire units vanished, cut down in ambushes, ammunition ran dry, men fought with blades, with fists, with teeth. Hale buried more soldiers than he could count. At night he sat among the ruins, his armor scarred, his face hollow. He watched the fires burn and wondered if he was killing his people as surely as the Dominion had. Arland found him there as always. "You're thinking too much," he said, dropping heavily beside him. Hale didn't answer. Arland smirked faintly. "We're in the belly of the beast and it's bleeding. That's enough." Hale finally looked at him. "And when the beast is dead, what then?" Arland shrugged. "Then we build something new, or we burn with it. Doesn't matter. What matters is they fall." The final push came at the grand spire, the seat of the Overlord himself. It towered over the city, obsidian and iron, bristling with defenses. Every corridor was lined with soldiers, every chamber a kill zone. Hale led the assault personally. His men stormed through the gates, cutting down defenders in rivers of blood. Explosions rocked the walls, fire consuming centuries of Dominion grandeur. At the throne room, the doors blew inward. Hale strode through the smoke, his blade in hand, his men behind him. The Overlord awaited him, a towering figure of scaled flesh and iron armor, his claws stained with blood, his eyes burning with fury. He rose from the throne, voice booming. "You dare defile my world, you dare crawl into my hall. Like vermin, I am the Dominion, I am eternal." Hale stepped forward, his voice steady. "No, you're finished." Overlord roared and charged. The battle was brutal, claws against steel, strength against fury. The Overlord struck like a storm, his blows shattering stone, his strength monstrous. But Hale fought with the rage of generations, the fury of a species beaten too long. Their clash shook the throne room, blood stained the floor, sparks lit the air. Hale's blade cut deep again and again, until finally, with a roar that shook the spires, he drove it through the Overlord's chest. The Dominion's ruler fell, his lifeblood staining the obsidian throne. For a moment silence reigned, then Hale raised his blade high, his voice carrying through the hall. "It's over." When the news spread, the galaxy changed. The Dominion, eternal and invincible, was dead, its fleets shattered, its ruler slain, its capital burning, and in its place stood humanity, scarred, broken, bloodied beyond recognition, but alive, triumphant. Across the stars, chains broke, slaves rose, worlds celebrated, and in hushed voices they spoke of Hale, the man who had turned a species from nothing into the first power in the galaxy. But Hale felt none of it. He stood amid the ruins of the throne room, his blade dripping, his armor cracked. Around him, his men roared in victory. But his eyes were hollow. He had killed the Overlord. He had ended the Dominion. But at what cost? The dead outnumbered The living, his people were scarred beyond recognition, and he himself was hollowed out, more weapon than man. Arlen joined him, grinning through blood. We did it, Hale nodded slowly. We did, Arlen clapped his shoulder. You're the man who killed an empire. The galaxy's yours now. Hale looked at the burning spire, at the corpses littering the throne. His voice was quiet, almost lost in the roar of flames. No, the galaxy is ours, and God help us for what we'll do with it. The Dominion was dead. Zaros burned, its obsidian spires shattered, its streets littered with corpses. The Overlord lay slain, his throne cracked in two. Across the galaxy, chains fell. Slave camps erupted in celebration. Alien races whispered of freedom. Humanity had done the impossible. But victory was not peace. From the balcony of the grand spire, now draped in human banners, Darren Hale looked out at the ruins of the Dominion's capital. Fires still smoldered in the distance, black smoke curling into the sky. The streets below were filled with his soldiers, some cheering, some mourning, all scarred beyond repair. Arlen came to stand beside him, his grin wide despite the blood still crusted on his armor. Look at it, Darren, we killed an empire, you know. How many men in history can say that? None, just you. Hale didn't smile. His eyes stayed fixed on the fires. Killing was the easy part. Arlen raised a brow. Easy? We bled half our species for this. Hale finally looked at him. His gaze was hollow, and now comes the harder part. Keeping it. The first cracks appeared within days. Human soldiers drunk on victory looted Dominion homes. Alien civilians were dragged into streets, beaten, executed. Centuries of rage spilled out in violence. At first Hale ignored it. He told himself it was inevitable, that the fury had to burn itself out. But when reports came of entire alien districts slaughtered by liberators, he could no longer look away. He summoned the offenders, men who had fought with him since Earth, scarred veterans who had lost everything. You dishonor what we fought for, Hale said coldly. One of them spat at his feet. We've honored it more than you. They made us slaves, now it's their turn. Without hesitation, Hale drew his sidearm and shot him in the head. The others froze, stunned. Hale's voice was steel. We are not their slaves. We will not be their monsters. Any man who forgets that will join him. Word spread quickly. Looting slowed, but Hale knew it wasn't over. The rage his people carried wasn't so easily leashed. The political fractures came next. On KTH Prime, human governors argued over control of factories and shipyards. On Ryveth, mercenary clans who had fought alongside humanity now demanded payment in blood and steel. Even among Hale's officers, voices rose in dispute. Some argued for expansion, conquer more worlds, seize resources, crush any alien who stood in the way. Others spoke of restraint, of rebuilding, of earning trust. Hale listened in silence. His eyes stayed hard, but inside he felt the storm building. When the arguments grew too heated, he finally spoke. We are not done. The Dominion is shattered, but the galaxy is not ours yet. If we turn on each other now, we will lose everything. Hold the line. The war isn't over. The room fell silent, but Hale saw the doubt in their eyes. In the shadows of Zaros, resistance brewed. Not all aliens rejoiced at the fall of the Dominion. For some, the Empire had been safety, stability, order. To them, the humans were not liberators, but Usurpers, cells of Dominion loyalists. Struck at night, ambushing patrols. Sabotaging supply lines, assassinating human officers. Hale responded ruthlessly. Whole districts were purged in retaliation. Civilians were rounded up, questioned, executed for every human death. 100 aliens died. Arlen watched, his grin thinner than before. You're walking a fine line, Darren. You want them to fear us, they do. But fear can cut both ways. Hale's reply was cold. Fear keeps us alive. But the worst blow came from within. On the 15th day after the fall of Xeris, Hale discovered betrayal. One of his closest officers, a man who had fought at his side since the first raid on Earth, had been feeding information to the Iraq Confederacy. When Hale confronted him, the officer didn't deny it. We can't hold this alone. We need them. The Arak will protect us if we let them in. Hale's voice was quiet. Dangerous. And what happens when they decide they own us, when they take what we bled for? The officer shook his head. Better their rule than ours. You're turning us into the very thing we destroyed. Hale stared at him for a long moment. Then he shot him in the chest. When his body was dragged out, Hale addressed his men. Betrayal will not be tolerated. We bled for this. We will not hand it away. Anyone who tries will die. The message was clear. But in the silence that followed, Hale felt something die inside himself as well. The galaxy, meanwhile, watched with growing unease. The Iraq Confederacy sent envoys again, smiling and polite. They congratulated humanity, offered alliance, promised friendship. But Hale saw the hunger in their eyes. You want the Dominion gone, he told them flatly. So do we, but don't mistake us for pawns. We will not bow to you. The envoy smiled thinly. No, of course not, but consider your people are weary, your fleet's broken. Alone you cannot hold this. With us you could build something lasting. Hale's gaze was iron. We in LT Unc and GT LL build it ourselves. Leave before I decide you won't. The envoys left, their smiles colder than before. Hale knew what it meant. The galaxy wasn't celebrating humanity's rise. It was calculating how to contain it. At night, Hale wandered the ruins of Xeris alone. The city that had once ruled the galaxy was a graveyard now, filled with ghosts. He stopped at the throne room where the Overlord's blood still stained the cracked floor. He stood in silence, staring at the shattered throne. He had thought victory would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like ashes. Arlen found him there as he always did. You're thinking too much again. Hale didn't answer. Arlen smirked faintly. We won, Darren. That's all that matters. Did we? Hale's voice was hollow. Look at us. We're killing civilians, executing our own men, tearing each other apart. Are we any better than they were? Arlen shrugged. Better doesn't matter. Stronger does. They ruled because they were strong. Now we are. That's how the galaxy works. Hale's jaw tightened. And what happens when strength is all we have left? Arlen didn't reply. For once his grin was gone. The rebellion that had begun as humanity's fight for survival was now something else. An empire was forming. Not by choice but by necessity. Worlds were conquered, garrisons established, banners raised. The galaxy had no room for weakness. To survive, humanity had to rule. But Hale felt the cost in his bones. Every choice hardened him. Further, every order blurred the line. between liberator and tyrant. He stood at the balcony of the Grand Spire looking down at the city of ashes. His men celebrated below, drinking, laughing, reveling in their impossible victory. But Hale did not celebrate. He saw what they couldn't. The storm still coming. The galaxy was vast, and though the Dominion had fallen, others waited. The Iraq, the mercenaries, the traitors, the rebels, all waiting for humanity to stumble, and he knew they would not forgive weakness. Arlen joined him once more as though bound to his shadow, thinking of tomorrow. Always, Hale muttered. Arlen smirked. Then you're ready. Tomorrow the galaxy learns we're not just survivors. We're rulers. Hale didn't reply. He only stared at the horizon, the fires still burning. Because he knew the truth Arlen wouldn't say. Victory was not the end. It was only the beginning. The fires of Zaris burned for weeks. The black spires of the Dominion's capital cracked and collapsed, sending shards of obsidian into the poisoned sky. Whole districts smoldered, the air thick with ash and blood. What had once been the throne of a galaxy-spanning empire was now a graveyard, and yet amid the ruins something new stirred. Human banners hung from the Grand Spire. Patrols marched in streets that had once been patrolled by alien soldiers. Factories grown back to life, not for the Dominion but for humanity. The galaxy had watched humanity fight. Now it watched to see how humanity would rule from the war room of the Iron Resolve. Hale looked at the galaxy's map one final time. The red glow of Dominion control was nearly gone. Its worlds fractured, its fleets scattered. In its place spread the blue of rebellion, human and alien alike. But rebellion was not unity. Reports poured in. Iraq, Confederacy fleets massing at the borders, mercenary clans shifting loyalties, newly freed worlds refusing to obey human commands. Even among his own officers, factions had formed. Some wanted expansion, others wanted peace. A few wanted to strip the galaxy bare in vengeance. The Dominion was dead, but its shadow lingered. Arlen stood beside him, his grin as sharp as ever. We've done it. The throne is ours. The galaxy is ours. All that's left is to claim it. Hale didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the stars. The celebration spread across humanity's fleets. Soldiers who had lived and fought like wolves now reveled in victory. They drank, laughed, embraced, shouted their triumph into the void. But in the shadows whispers grew. Some said Hale had become too ruthless, that his executions and purges were no different from Dominion cruelty. Others said he wasn't ruthless enough, that mercy would weaken humanity and doom them. For the first time since the rebellion began, Hale felt the foundation beneath him shift. Victory had united them, but peace, or what passed for it, might tear them apart. The first fracture came on KTH Prime. Human governors argued over control of the factories. Rival commanders clashed. In the street, soldiers drawing weapons on each other. By the time Hale arrived, hundreds were dead. He gathered the surviving officers in the plaza. His voice was cold, steady. We bled to take this world. We did not bleed to hand it over to greed. If you want to fight for power, I will give you war, but you'll fight me. Silence. No one challenged him, but Hale knew the truth. Unity born of fear was fragile, and his people were beginning to fear him. In the halls of the Grand Spire, Hale met with envoys from across the galaxy. The Iraq Confederacy arrived. First, their leader cloaked in silver bowed low. Humanity has proven strong, but strength alone is not enough. Join us, together we can shape the galaxy. Hale's reply was flat. We don't join, we lead. The envoy's eyes narrowed. Lead or dominate? Your people are scarred, Commander. Fleet's broken. Do you truly believe you can hold what you've taken? Hale's gaze was iron. Believe it. No, I know it, and if you doubt it, test us. The Arik left with cold smiles. Hale knew they would not ally. They would wait and strike if humanity faltered. Next came envoys from newly freed worlds. Some begged for protection. Others demanded independence. Few trusted humanity to be more than conquerors. Hale gave them all the same answer. Stand with us and you will share in our strength. Stand against us and you will share in the Dominion's fate. The galaxy listened and trembled. But Hale's greatest trial did not come from beyond, it came from within. One night, reports reached him of a mutiny brewing in his own fleet. Veterans who had fought since Earth, weary and disillusioned, claimed Hale had become what he swore to destroy. They whispered of replacing him with a council or of surrendering authority to alien allies. Hale called them before him. You followed me into fire, he said, his voice low, steady. You bled with me, you killed with me, and now you call me a tyrant. One of them, gaunt and scarred, stepped forward. We fought to be free, Darren, not to build another empire. We didn't bleed to become the monsters we hated. Hale's eyes burned. We didn't bleed to become weak either. Freedom means nothing if we cannot keep it, and to keep it we must rule. The man shook his head. Then you've already lost. For a moment silence hung heavy. Then Hale drew his pistol and shot him where he stood. The others recoiled. Some reached for weapons. Hale's voice thundered over them. You think this is about me, about power? It's about survival. The galaxy does not care for freedom, it cares for strength. If we show weakness now, we die, all of us. Remember that before you betray everything we've built. None answered. But Hale saw the fear in their eyes, and he wondered if Arlen had been right all along. Perhaps fear was all that kept them together. In the days that followed, Hale wandered the ruins of Xeris. More often, he found himself standing in the shattered throne room, staring at the broken seat of the Overlord. He remembered the fight, the blood, the roar of victory. He remembered thinking it was the end of everything. But it wasn't. It was only the beginning. Arlen joined him there as he always did. You're brooding again. Hale didn't look at him. I thought killing him would change things, that it would mean something. But it doesn't feel like victory. It feels like another chain. Arlen smirked faintly. That's because you're not done yet. The throne's empty, Darren. Someone has to sit in it. Hale turned, his eyes sharp. And if sitting in it means becoming him. Arlen's grin widened. Then you become him. Better you than anyone else. Hale didn't reply, but the thought lingered like a shadow. The coronation was not planned. It happened because it had to. In the ruins of the Grand Spire, surrounded by soldiers, officers, and envoys, Hale stood before the broken throne. His men demanded leadership. Galaxy demanded order. The choice was simple: seize the throne or watch everything collapse. Slowly Hale lowered himself onto the seat. The hall erupted in cheers, roars, cries of triumph. Humanity had a ruler. The Dominion was dead, but in its place rose Something new. The Terran ascendancy. Hale sat in silence, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on his shoulders. He was no longer just a commander, he was an emperor. That night Hale stood on the balcony looking out at the burning city. Arlen joined him, grinned sharp as ever. Well, you did it. The galaxy is yours. Hale's voice was quiet. No, the galaxy is ours, and God help us for what we'll do with it. Arlen laughed. God left this galaxy a long time ago. All that's left is us. Hale didn't answer. He only stared at the fires, knowing the truth. Humanity had become the first power in the galaxy, but whether it was salvation or damnation, only time would tell.